character of Troy. The tale of the monster was first told by Homer in the 8th century BC. In this legend, a terrifying monster suddenly appeared on the Trojan coast after a flood and began preying on the farmers in the neighborhood of Sigeum. The king's daughter, Hesione, was sent to be offered as a sacrifice to the monster, but according to the legend, heralds arrived in time to kill it. The painting on the vase shows Hesione and Heracles battling the monster, with Hesione tossing rocks at it and Heracles shooting arrows. You can understand the obvious plight of evolutionists when confronted with such imagery. Thus, in an effort to explain this artwork in light of evolutionary timescales, the editors of Science News concluded that the paintings on this unusual vase simply prove that ancient people dug fossils, too. They believe that this painting was the end result of fossils, possibly of an extinct giraffe, that were dug up thousands of years ago. What's that old saying? If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a giraffe. Human footprints with dinosaur tracks. Consider also that in 1983, researchers reported in the Science and Engineering News section of the Moscow News that they had discovered what appeared to be a human footprint in 150-million-year-old Jurassic rock, next to a giant, three-toed dinosaur footprint. The article stated, "This spring, an expedition from the Institute of Geology of the Turkmen SSR Academy of Sciences found over 1,500 tracks left by dinosaurs in the mountains in the southeast of the Republic, Turkmen Republic, BHBT. Impressions resembling in shape a human footprint were discovered next to the tracks of prehistoric animals. See, Tracking Dinosaurs, 1983, 2410. Naturally, this report has received precious little attention, given the mindset of evolutionists. Historical records of flying reptiles. Additional evidence for the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs is derived from various ancient writings. For instance, the largest creature ever known to have soared in the skies above the earth was a pterosaur identified as Quetzalcoatlus, Kwetzacoatlus. The fossil bones of one of these flying reptiles were unearthed in 1972 at Big Bend National Park in Texas. This Quetzalcoatlus had a wingspan of 48 feet, which is longer than some small airplanes. While these giant birds are not classified scientifically as dinosaurs since they are not strictly land-dwelling creatures as dinosaurs were, by definition they often are lumped into a group of animals known as dinosaur-like creatures. Notice the following quotation taken from Herodotus, a Greek historian from the 5th century BC, who wrote, "There is a place in Arabia, to which I went, on hearing of some winged serpents, and when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents, in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and as like as possible to the wings of a bat." 1850, pages 75-76, Emp. Added. Pteranodon. Herodotus knew of flying reptiles, and recognized that these creatures were neither birds, mammals, nor insects, but reptiles with wings. Notice also what the Jewish historian Josephus wrote 2,000 years ago about Moses and his army having a difficult time passing through a particular region because of the presence of flying serpents. When the ground was difficult to be passed over, because of the multitude of serpents which it produces in vast numbers, some of which ascend out of the ground unseen, and also fly in the air, and do come upon men at unawares, and do them a mischief. Moses made baskets like unto arks, of sedge, and filled them with ibis, i.e., birds, and carried them along with them, which animal is the greatest enemy the serpents imaginable, for they fly from them when they come near them, and as they fly they are cut and devoured by them. ND 210-2, Emp. Added. Although these two historians do not mention the extremely large flying reptiles, they do record that snake-like winged creatures, which could fly, did live in the distant past. These reports are consistent with findings that A. H. Verrill reported in 1954 in his book, Strange Prehistoric Animals and Their Stories. Primitive man, finding a fossil pterodactyl, might assume that the skeleton was that of some strange winged monster which still existed. Being totally ignorant of fossils and geology, an Indian or any other savage or semi-savage human being would never suspect that the bones had been reserved in rock for millions of years. Neither would it be possible for such primitive men to reconstruct mentally the creature as they appeared in life. It is of course inconceivable that the Colopotter had first-hand knowledge of a living pterodactyl, ancient as the pottery is, yet had he been as familiar with the flying monsters as he was with pelicans and jaguars, he could not have depicted them more strikingly and accurately. Not only do the drawings show beak-like jaws armed with sharp teeth, but in addition the wings with two curved claws are depicted. Included also are the short, pointed tail, the reptilian head crest or appendages, and the strong hind feet with 5 clawed toes on each. 1954, pages 55,57-58. Obviously, the scientific evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and man speaks loudly, and yet it continues to fall on deaf ears within the evolutionary community. That silence, however, does little to change the documented facts, as we now know them. Conclusion. Contrary to popular opinion, dinosaurs do not present a problem for creationists. In fact, quite the opposite is true. It is evolutionists who have a problem. while they continue to maintain, as the late paleontologist Roland T. Burt of the American Museum of Natural History once put it, that no man had ever existed in the age of the reptiles. 1939, 43, 5, 257. The evidence documents exactly the opposite. The mosaic record of the creation is inexhaustibly sublime. In it, we learn of the creation of the heavens and the earth by an almighty God. By divine fiat, light was formed and atmosphere was wrapped around this planet. Great seas were gathered together and separated from dry land. The world of botany miraculously bloomed, and lights burst forth in the heavens. The waters swarmed with living creatures, and birds soared through the pristine air. Varieties of domestic animals and beasts were created, and finally, man, the zenith of God's creation, stood proudly upon the earth's bosom. The dinosaur, one of the most majestic of God's creatures, stood with man. No doubt they pondered each other's existence. Today, we still stand amazed at these awesome giants. And as we do, their presence in the past should remind us of the magnificence of the God who was able to speak them into existence by the word of his power. Hebrews 1:3. Awesome creatures, from the hand of an awesome creator. Back in middle 1940s, Dr. Frank C. Hippen, professor of archaeology at the University of New Mexico, mounted an expedition to Alaska to look for human remains. The remains he found were not human, but what he found was anything but evidence of gradualism or uniformitarianism. Instead he found miles of muck filled with the remains of mammoth, mastodon, several kinds of bison, horses, wolves, bears and lions. Just north of Fairbanks, Hippens and his associates watched as bulldozers pushed the half-melted muck into sluice boxes for the extraction of gold. Animal tusks and bones rolled up in front of the blades like shavings before a giant plane. The carcasses were found in all attitudes of death, most of them pulled apart by some unexplainable prehistoric catastrophic disturbance. Hippen, 1946. The evidence of the violence of nature combined with the stench of rotting carcasses was staggering. The ice fields containing these remains stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Hippen, 1946. Trees and animals, layers of peat and mosses, twisted and mangled together like some giant mixer had jumbled them some 10,000 years ago and then froze them into a solid mass. The evidence immediately suggests an enormous tidal wave which raged over the land, tumbling animals and vegetation within its mass, which was then quick frozen. Sanderson, 1960. But the extinction is not limited to the Arctic. Paleontologist George G. Simpson considers the extinction of the Pleistocene horse in North America to be one of the most mysterious episodes in zoological history, admitting that in all honesty no one knows the answer. He also admits that this is only a part of the larger problem of the extinction of many other species in America at the same time. Simpson, 1961. The horse is merely the tip of the iceberg. Giant tortoises living in the Caribbean Sea, the giant sloth, the saber-toothed tiger, the glyptodont and tusodon. These were all tropical animals. They weren't wiped out because Alaska and Siberia were experiencing an ice age. Unless one is willing to postulate freezing temperatures across the equator, such an explanation clearly begs the question, say leading paleontologists Martin and Gilday, 1967. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, giant armadillos, giant beavers, giant jaguars, giant ground sloths and scores of other entire species were all totally wiped out at the end of the Pleistocene. Massive piles of mastodon and saber-toothed tiger bones were discovered in Florida. Valentine, 1969, while whole mastodons, tusodons, giant sloths and other animals were found in Venezuela, quick frozen among the mountain glaciers. Berlitz, 1969, all died on a global scale at about the same time, circa 10,000 BC. Frozen animals in Siberia. The picture in Siberia and northern Europe is no different. Just north of Siberia, whole islands are formed of the bones of Pleistocene animals swept northward from the continent into the frigid waters of the Arctic Ocean. It has been estimated that some 10 million animals lay buried along the rivers of northern Siberia. Thousands of tusks formed a massive ivory trade for the master carvers of China, all from the remains of the frozen mammoths and mastodons of Siberia. The famous Parasolka mammoth first drew attention to the preserving properties of being quick frozen when buttercups were found in its mouth and undigested food in its stomach. This was no gradual event, it had to be sudden. And the event was worldwide. The mammoths of Siberia became extinct about the same time as the giant rhinoceros of Europe, the mastodons of Alaska and the bison of Siberia ended simultaneously. The same is true of the Asian elephants and the American camels. The cause of these extinctions must be common to both hemispheres. If the coming of glacial conditions was gradual, it would not have caused the extinctions, because the various animals could have simply migrated to where conditions were better. What is seen here is total surprise and uncontrolled violence. Leonard, 1979. Source, AtlantisQuest.com. Problems with frozen mammoths and the alleged extinction of megafauna at the hands of men. Excerpted from Red Earth, White Lies by Vine Deloria. In even the most prejudiced murder trial there is one essential element, there has to have been a killing. Fancy legal terminology generally requires a body, the corpus delictus as the TV detective shows are fond of telling us.